the weather. Five on the floor, the party's on at your place. Five to the front, there's a smile on my face. Hi, 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 hi. Together, 1, 2, 3, 4, high five. 1, 2, 3, 4, high five. 1, 2, 3, 4, high five. High five in the air, let's do it together. High five.
Hi everyone, and welcome to High Five!
What an amazing morning, right?
Absolutely! It's a perfect day to learn something new. From our previous presentations, we've explored so many historical events that shape our nation and continue to influence us today.
That's true. So, what's the new topic we're diving into this time?
Let me give you a hint. What comes to your mind when you hear lands, farmers, lush green fields, and the Philippines being known as an agricultural nation? Think. That's right! Today we'll talk about farmers, the backbone of our local economy. They've been feeding the nations for generations, but here's the big question. Why do so many of them remain poor despite cultivating the rich and fertile lands of our country?
History tells us a lot about this. During the colonial period, Filipino farmers faced endless struggles. Natural disasters and man-made challenges often prevented them from enjoying the fruits of their hard work. Even with the country's vast resources, they live in poverty.
Exactly. For years, these farmers have dreamed of breaking free from the control of landlords. Owning the land they worked on wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming their dignity and securing a better future for themselves and their families.
And over time, the government responded to these struggles by introducing agrarian reform laws. These laws have evolved significantly over the decades, aiming to address the pressing needs of our farmers.
Ooh, interesting.
That's really fascinating. This episode will tackle about more than just the farmers. It's a journey through history, tracing the evolution of agrarian reforms in the Philippines. These laws were designed to help the very people who are the backbone of our economy. So, what's kicking things off?
Alright, I'll take the lead. Let's start by looking back at the colonial period and how it set the stage for the agrarian challenges we face today. Oh, hi everybody! I'm Rika. The weather's so nice today that it would be such a waste if we don't talk about something interesting and important. Are you ready? Because I am! Agrarian reform in the Philippines is an essential effort to address the imbalance in land distribution, a long-standing issue rooted in the country's colonial history. In a nation where nearly half of the population works in agriculture and many live in rural areas, agrarian reform aims to restrict land ownership and improve the livelihood of farmers. The heart of agrarian reform lies in the redistribution of land from wealthy landowners to landless farmers, with the goal of promoting greater equity and productivity in the agricultural sector. Beyond the distribution of land, agrarian reform in the Philippines also aims to modernize agriculture by enhancing education, supporting cooperatives, providing credit, and developing agro-based industries. The social justice aspect of agrarian reform is particularly significant as it aims to uplift marginalized farmers and improve their quality of life. Now you have an idea about agrarian reform. Time to go back from the very start. A long time ago, before the Spaniards arrived, Filipinos lived in villages or barangays ruled by chiefs known as datus. The datus represented the nobility or maharlikas, followed by the timawas or freemen, and then the aliping namamahay or serfs and aliping sagigilid or slaves. Hey, but wait! I have a quick question for you. Despite the social hierarchy, did most people have access to the land's resources or not? Nice one! Well, most people still had access to land's resources. The Maharlikas were exempt from paying taxes or tributes but were obligated to follow their datu to war. They supplied their own weapons and equipment, built their homes, manned boats, and cultivated their rice fields. The Timawas or freemen retained their independence but supported their datu in various ways. The aliping namamahay tilled the land of their masters who could be a datu or a Maharlika. The serfs and their master equally shared the produce of the land. The aliping sagigilids served their masters in both his house and farm. They were allowed some share of the harvest, but they were their master's property. Despite the existence of different classes in social structure, practically everyone had access to fruits of the soil, right? Money was unknown, and rice served as the medium of exchange. Not until Spaniards came to the Philippines. When the Spaniards came to the Philippines, lands were divided and granted to encourage Spanish settlers or reward soldiers who served the crown. These were called encomiendas. This system grants that encomenderos must defend his encomenda from external attack, maintain peace and order within, and support the missionaries. In return, encomenderos gained the right to collect tributes from the Indios. The system, however, degenerated into abuse of power by encomenderos. The tributes soon became land rents to a few powerful landlords. The natives who once cultivated the lands in freedom were transformed into mere share tenants. And the encomenderos? They became the first class of hacenderos. The Spanish introduced a pueblo agricultural system, consolidating rural communities and establishing Spanish control over land. Filipinos who previously enjoyed communal land ownership were reduced to sharecroppers, paying tributes to Spanish authorities and encomenderos. The 19th century saw the rise of the hacienda system, further concentrating land ownership in the hands of the elite. Laws favoring the wealthy, including the friars, dispossessed many Filipinos of their ancestral lands. This exploitation, coupled with abusive practices like forced labor and unfair rents, fueled resentment and contributed to the Philippine Revolution. Tragic. In the present time, the legacy of Spanish land policies continues to impact Philippine society, creating deep-rooted agrarian issues that shape the nation's history.
Huh? Oh, cool!
Hey everyone, it's Janice here. I hope you're ready because today we are uncovering more about the history of agrarian reform in the Philippines. Are you excited? Let's go! The story begins with the first Philippine Republic in 1899, led by President Emilio Aguinaldo. One of its biggest goals was land reform. The Malolos Constitution promised to reclaim lands, buildings, and properties owned by religious groups, especially the friar lands, and give them back to the Filipino people. Awesome plan, right? But here's the catch. The Republic didn't last long, so those promises couldn't be fulfilled anyway. Sad, huh? Then came the Americans, who noticed that farmers didn't own the lands they worked on. This caused a lot of unrest, so they introduced laws to help tenant farmers, people who worked on land they didn't own, get a chance to own land. But not everything worked out as planned. First, the Rice Share Tenancy Act. This law focused on the rice farms. It said landlords and tenants should split the harvest 50-50. It also limited loan interest rates to 10%, protected tenants from unfair eviction, and required written tenancy agreements. The Sugarcane Tenancy Contracts Act worked the same way but focused on sugarcane farms. Both acts aimed to improve the tenant farmers' lives, but there was one big problem. These laws didn't limit how much land a person could own. Wealthy landlords stayed rich, and poor farmers stayed, well, poor. The Americans also tried buying friar lands to sell them to farmers. While this was meant to help, many of these lands were sold to wealthy business owners instead. Farmers couldn't afford to buy the lands or pay their debts, so they often lost everything. Another idea was the homestead program, where farmers could get a piece of land to farm. They also introduced the Taurian system to register land ownership. Sounds good? Well, not really. Farmers didn't get training or money they needed, so many failed and went back to being tenants. Because these reforms didn't solve the problems, many farmers became angry. Some joined protests like the Colorum and Sakdal movements in Luzon. These were uprisings against unfair treatment and lack of real change. Others turned to millenarian movement, believing that only religious or revolutionary changes could fix the system. So, what happened? Under the First Philippine Republic, land reform plans couldn't move forward. Under the Americans, reforms helped a little but often made things worse for many farmers. Inequality grew, and the landlord-tenant system became even stronger. But don't worry, there's so much more to learn about the agrarian reform in the Philippines, so stay tuned!
Wow!
Wow, that was an amazing discussion, Janice. Hi there, everyone, and I'm Bree. Guess what? We're diving into the Commonwealth period today. Let's make this fun and interesting. The Commonwealth government of the Philippines ran from 1935 to 1946. Think of it as the country's stepping stone to self-governance, led by none other than President Manuel L. Quezon. His administration had one big mission, government for the Filipinos, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. They had to tackle some pretty tough issues, especially the landlord-tenant conflicts, causing a lot of unrest. Quezon's social justice program focused on land reform to address tenant struggles by taking away large estates, purchasing haciendas, and redistributing land to tenants. To promote ownership, to support farmers, the National Rice and Corn Corporation, in short NARIC, provided legal assistance, and the Court of Industrial Relations resolved landlord-tenant disputes. Additionally, the Homestead Program under the National Land Settlement Administration encouraged agricultural settlement. However, these reforms face significant challenges, including limited funding, strong resistance from landowners, and persistent tenant poverty. Efforts to address the agrarian crisis were further disrupted by World War II, as the Japanese occupation halted ongoing initiatives, worsening the situation. So, while reforms didn't go as far as planned, there were still some important wins. Let's highlight a few key legislations from this era. The 1935 Constitution. Talk about social justice and making sure everyone had economic security. Commonwealth Act Number 178 set rules for landlord-tenant relationships. The NARIC helped stabilize rice and corn prices. Great news for both farmers and consumers. Lastly, the Commonwealth Act Number 461 protected tenants by limiting dismissals, but landlords need approval from the Department of Justice. And that wraps up the agrarian reform during the Commonwealth period. Now, let's move on to the Japanese occupation. During this era, peasant and worker organizations grew stronger, with many taking up arms against the occupiers. These groups aligned themselves with the Hukbalahap, which means Hukbo ng Bayan Laban sa Hapon, an anti-Japanese resistance movement. The Hukbalahap took over large parts of central Luzon. Landlords who sided with the Japanese often lost their lands, which were taken by the peasants. On the other hand, landlords who supported the Hukbalahap got to keep their land, with fixed rentals set up to benefit the tenant farmers. But unfortunately, when the war ended, so did the progress the peasants had made during the Japanese occupation. The Japanese era was short and not sweet, but it was a remarkable moment for peasants and land ownership. Now, the question is, in what ways did the Japanese occupation alter the power dynamics for landowners and peasants?
It's a lot of history, no? Well, I hope you're ready for more, because now we're going to learn about the post-war interventions towards agrarian reform in the Third Republic in the Philippines. The period of the Third Republic could be summarized by one word: rehabilitation. The rehabilitation of the Philippines' economy, sovereignty, and the rebuilding of all that was destroyed during World War II. In this section, we will learn about the policies of agrarian reform from the administrations between the years of 1946 to 1964. Let's learn!
After World War II, rehabilitation and rebuilding was focused on providing solutions to the problems of the past. President Roxas' administration passed Republic Act No. 34 to establish a 70-30 sharing agreement between tenant and landlord respectively, and reduce the interest of landowners' loans to tenants at 6% or less. The government also attempted to redistribute hacienda lands, falling prey to the problems of similar attempts since no support was given to small farmers who were sold these lands.
Under the term of President Elpidio Quirino, an agency was created to accelerate and expand the resettlement program for poor farmers. This would later be improved upon in the administration of Ramon Magsaysay. President Magsaysay worked to convince Congress to pass legislation to facilitate genuine land reform.
This led to the enactment of Republic Act No. 1199, also known as the Agricultural Tenancy Act, which governed the relationship between landowners and tenant farmers, particularly by organizing the shared tenancy and leasehold systems to ensure the greater security for the tenures of the farmers. To support these efforts, numerous agencies such as the Court of Agricultural Relations was created in 1955 to resolve land disputes, fix land rentals for tenanted farms, and improve tenancy security. Additionally, the Agricultural Tenancy Commission was established to handle issues arising from tenancy relationships. The Agricultural Credit and Cooperative Financing Administration, or ACCFA, was set up to provide warehouse facilities and assist farmers in marketing their products. The government also spearheaded the creation of the Agricultural and Industrial Bank, which offered easier terms for acquiring homestead and farmland. Another important initiative was the acceleration of the government's resettlement program. It aimed to distribute agricultural lands to landless tenants and farmers, and it sought to persuade members of the Hook movement, rebels from Central Luzon, to resettle in areas where they could begin peaceful, productive lives.
Despite these efforts towards agrarian reform, the situation for farmers remained grim. The government faced financial constraints, and support services for the programs were inadequate. The landed elite, resistant to reform initiatives, did not fully cooperate and openly criticized the programs. As a result, the promises of land reform remained largely unfulfilled for many of the nation's tenant farmers. While President Carlos P. Garcia continued Magsaysa's agrarian reforms, he did not enact new legislation. The streak of failed land reforms would, however, be remedied by Diosdado Macapagal's landmark reform. Or was it? The Agricultural Land Reform Code of 1963, or Republic Act 3844, marked a significant advancement in the pursuit of land reform in the Philippines.
The law sought to address the growing inequality in land ownership and the plight of tenant farmers, by promoting owner cultivatorship and the development of economic family-sized farms. One of its key aims was to shift away from the traditional landlord-tenant system and empower farmers to become self-reliant landowners.
The Agricultural Land Reform Code marked an important moment in the history of Philippine land reform. It laid the foundation for future agrarian reform efforts, even though the initial implementation was not as effective as it could have been. But the learning's not over yet. Next up is Resec Discussion.
Wow! It's been a really long discussion, yet we're still not done. But hey, high five will never be complete without me. Hi classmates, I'm Rex, and now we will continue delving into the evolution of agrarian reform, starting with the policies under President Ferdinand Marcos. During martial law, President Ferdinand Marcos introduced agrarian reforms to address rural poverty and improve farmers' livelihood. By bypassing a landlord-dominated Congress, he implemented measures like Republic Act No. 6389, which created the Department of Agrarian Reform o DAR to oversee these efforts. However, implementation faced major challenges. Landowner exploited loopholes, evicted tenants, and shifted to exempt crops. Many landless farmers were excluded, and corruption among Marcos' allies further weakened the program. Ultimately, while these reforms aim to reduce inequality, elite resistance and cloud enforcement left many rural Filipinos in poverty, underscoring the difficulty of achieving a genuine reform. Now, we're diving even deeper into agrarian reform as we move past the Marcos era. This time, let's explore the changes that happened under President Corazon Aquino and how they paved the way for the programs that followed. The fall of Marcos and the adoption of the 1987 Constitution mark a turning point for agrarian reform in the Philippines. President Corazon Aquino, a symbol of the country's restored democracy, declared agrarian reform as the heart of her administration's social agenda. But Aquino's personal background as a member of a wealthy, landed family, particularly linked to the controversial Hacienda Luisita, raised concerns about her commitment to genuine land reform.
On July 22, 1987, Aquino issued two key orders: Presidential Proclamation 131 prioritizing agrarian reform and Executive Order 229 establishing the framework for her program. In 1988, Congress passed Republic Act No. 6657 or CARL, which implemented the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program or CARP. Key provisions included redistributing land from landlords to tenant farmers, allowing landowners to retain up to 5 hectares, and enabling corporate landowners to distribute stock instead of land. Despite ambitious goal, CARP faced challenges during Aquino's term. Only 22.5% of target lands were redistributed in 6 years with Congress that is dominated by the landed elite, resisting adequate funding. The controversial restructuring of the Hacienda Luisita allowed stock distribution to farmers instead of actual land ownership.
This controversy cast a shadow on Aquino's commitment to agrarian reform, showing how deeply entrenched elite interests could undermine even the most well-intentioned policies. Aquino's agrarian reform initiatives laid the foundation for future programs, but they also highlighted the deep challenges of balancing political power and social justice. Continuing from where we left off, let's dive deeper into the agrarian reform efforts under President Fidel V. Ramos and Joseph Estrada, both of whom played crucial roles in advancing the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program or CARP. Despite facing several challenges, they worked tirelessly to improve the lives of Filipino farmers.
Under President Fidel V. Ramos, the implementation of CARP was accelerated, achieving 58.25% of the target area by 1996 despite funding and logistical challenges. To address remaining gaps, Ramos signed Republic Act No. 8532 in 1998, extending the program for another 10 years.
President Ramos' actions were critical in pushing CARP forward, but as you'll see, agrarian reform continued to evolve under the leadership of President Joseph Estrada.
President Joseph Estrada launched the Magsasaka Program, fostering partnership between agrarian reform beneficiaries or ARBs and private investors. Executive Order No. 151 further promoted the voluntary consolidation of small farms into competitive enterprises.
While these efforts were important, both the Ramos and Estrada administration faced significant challenges, primarily funding and the complexities of implementation. Despite their efforts, the task of achieving full agrarian reform was not easy. Next, President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo continued these efforts through the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program Extension with Reforms, or CARPER, ensuring that the promise of land redistribution for Filipino farmers. This was a pivotal move in ensuring that the promise of land redistribution was kept for Filipino farmers.
Under President Arroyo's leadership, the CARP faced yet another extension through Republic Act No. 9700, enacted in 2009. This law aimed to address the backlog in land distribution by extending the program's deadline until June 30, 2014. With a substantial budget of 150 billion pesos, CARPER sought to redistribute 1.2 million hectares of land to landless farmers, tenants, and farm workers.
CARPER wasn't just about land, it was also about fairness and inclusivity. The law introduced reforms that focus on gender equality, ensuring that rural women had the right to own land and be represented in the Presidential Agrarian Reform Council or PARC. Overall, CARPER represented a critical effort to continue agrarian reform and ensure that a more equitable distribution of land across the Philippines. It sought not only to promote rural development but also to empower farmers, especially women, and guarantee that the land redistribution will continue in a fair and transparent manner. As we move through the years, each president has brought their own vision for agrarian reform. Let's take a look at the more recent efforts under President Benigno Aquino III, Rodrigo Duterte, and Ferdinand Marcos Jr.
Under President Benigno Aquino III, the focus was on completing land distribution under CARP, including the Hacienda Luisita case. His administration reduced rural poverty through RCES and APCP programs, prioritized faster case resolutions with the LCMs, and promoted sustainability with the National Grading Program.
Though significant challenges remain, like the unresolved Hacienda Luisita issue, but Aquino pushed for its redistribution. Now, let's move to the next president.
Under President Rodrigo Duterte, land reform became more aggressive. His administration redistributed military lands, placed Boracay's agricultural lands under CARP, created an anti-corruption task force in the AR, and fast-tracked cases with Oplan Zero backlog.
Duterte tackled agrarian issues with a tough stance, prioritizing reforms and anti-corruption efforts in the DAR. Now, let's move to the present president.
President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has continued land redistribution, distributing titles to over 2,000 beneficiaries in Palawan and condoning amortization for lands that are already distributed. His administration also engages youth in farming for food security.
Marcos Jr. has distributed 140,000 hectares and reintegrated former rebels into agriculture, demonstrating his commitment to agrarian reform. That's it for the evolution of agrarian reform from Spanish era to present days. This is my question. Given that the numerous laws and policies enacted over the decades, do you believe these initiatives have genuinely improved the lives of farmers, especially considering that many of these challenges are still present in the current generation? Oh, what an insightful answers. Now, it's time for High Five to be complete again.
Wow, that truly felt like a journey through history.
I've learned so much from this discussion.
Same here.
But I have a question to you all guys. Did you notice the subtle differences in how each agrarian reform law evolved over time?
I did. The evolution of agrarian reform laws in the Philippines clearly shows a shift from regulating tenancy to actively promoting land redistribution.
Exactly. Early laws like the Philippine Rice Share Tenancy Act of 1933 and the Agricultural Tenancy Act of 1954 were focused on regulating sharecropping and protecting tenant rights.
Then came the Agricultural Land Reform Code of 1963, which aimed to establish owner cultivatorship. Unfortunately, it struggled due to funding issues. Later, Marcos's decrees in the 1970s attempted land redistribution, but these efforts were undermined by corruption and loopholes.
Finally, after 1986 reforms like the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law of 1988 and its 2009 extension prioritized transferring land ownership to tenant farmers, providing compensation to landowners as part of the process.
In summary, this law progressed from merely regulating tenancy to bringing up large estates and redistributing land to farmers, with each reform addressing the shortcomings of the previous ones.
But what really struck me is how vital our farmers are to our country. They're the reason we have rice on our tables. And it's heartbreaking though that if you ask children what they want to be when they grow up, almost none say they want to be farmers.
Right. Even with all these reform laws, it's disheartening that farmers remain undervalued and don't receive fair prices for the rice they produce.
It's also sad that despite being called an agricultural country, we still heavily rely on importing rice from other nations.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that many rice fields are being converted into subdivisions.
The whole
Okay, we would love to continue this conversation, but unfortunately, our time is running out.
I really enjoyed this episode. Let's catch up again next time.
Bye!